All right, let's get this started. Good evening and welcome to the virtual Rose O'Neill Literary House at Washington College. My name is Roy Kesey. I'm the Associate Director here and I'll be your host this evening. We'd like to begin with the Land Acknowledgement. The Rose O'Neill Literary House acknowledges this region as the original homelands of the Wycomice, the Choptank, and the Nanticoke tribes. We acknowledge their painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory. We honor the indigenous peoples still connected to this land, and we are committed to making our community a more equitable and inclusive place to gather and learn. I'd also like to welcome and thank our ASL interpreters tonight, Jamie and Stephanie, and our co-sponsors for this event, the Sophie Kerr Committee and the Alumni House, for their support of tonight's celebration of this book, A Guide to Hiking the Liberal Arts, the Washington College Kiplin Hall Program, published in 2020 by Common Ground. Its author, Dr. Richard Gillin, is a professor emeritus of English at Washington College. He taught English literature here, 18th and 19th century, specializing in English Romanticism for 46 years. 46. He served as the Ernest A. Howard Professor of English Literature, as chair of the English Department, and as chair of the Humanities Division. And together with his late wife, Barbara, he founded the Washington College Kiplin Hall Program and went on to direct that program for more than 20 years. We'll be talking about that program and the book that it inspired much more in a moment. But one of my preliminary goals tonight is to lead you to an understanding of why Dr. Gillin's classes were so popular and so deeply beloved. To do so, I'm going to be leaning in part on my own experience. I first met Dr. Gillin in the spring of 1989 when I was a student in his legendary course on the English Romantics. Weirdly, this means that we need to talk about Oscar Wilde. Now, Wilde, obviously not a romantic author, but maybe this is just me, but it seems like there's some weird sort of picture of Dorian Gray business going on here. I'd like to show you a picture of Dr. Gillin from that same time period. There we are. It's magnificent, right? I suspect that that jacket was already vintage when the picture was taken, and I would wear it in a heartbeat if he'd lend it out. But more importantly, look at his face in that picture. And now look at him live this evening. Nothing has changed. What in the world? It's not a single, it's unfeasible, right? Time has not touched him. Whereas some people, and I don't mean to call anyone out, but certain people spent the 1980s looking like they are probably not going to make bail. That's the one. I know. I don't remember exactly what the arrest warrant said. All I really remember is we were at the Bluebird Tavern. It was me and Dr. Gillin, I think Dr. DeProspo. For some reason, Patrick Swayze was there and someone picked up a pool cue. And the next thing you know, you're waking up in county, you're missing a few teeth, you're regretting the decisions that you have made. More importantly, point being, in 1989, looking like that, I took Dr. Gillin's course on the English Romantics. We read a little Blake, I think. We read some Coleridge and some Wordsworth, Byron and Shelley and Keats. And I remember several things about that course that illustrate what an extraordinary educator Dr. Gillin was. He often asked us to read work out loud because he knew that in most good poetry, there are things going on that you'll miss entirely if you don't hear it out loud. My favorite instance of this was when he had us read from the famous poem by John Keats called The Eve of St. Agnes. And I'd like to read just a few lines of that poem for you tonight. For purposes of clarity, you only need to know that the she that begins the passage is Madeline, the star of the poem, and the other main character is Porphyro, a young man who is very eager to get some alone time with Madeline. Excuse me, here we go. The Eve of St. Agnes, John Keats. She danced along with vague, regardless eyes, anxious her lips, her breathing quick and short. The hallowed hour was near at hand, she sighs, amid the timbrels and the thronged resort of whisperers in anger or in sport. Mid looks of love, defiance, hate and scorn, hoodwinked with fairy fancy, all amort, save to Saint Agnes and her lambs unshorn, and all the bliss to be before tomorrow morn. So, purposing each moment to retire, she lingered still. Meantime, across the moors had come young Porphyro with hard-on for Madeline. Sorry, no, with hard-on fire for heart on fire for Madeline. You get the point, which is not just that it's funny, although it is funny, and very much of a piece with certain strains in English literature going all the way back through Shakespeare to Chaucer, at least, probably even earlier. Dr. Rydell, earlier? Yeah? Yeah, I thought so. Dr. Gillin wanted us to know that the Romantic poets were vaster and more chaotic and funnier than most people give them credit for. They've been dead for 200 years, but their work will keep surprising us if we let it. Dr. Gillin wanted us to understand that the Romantic poets were each multivocal, and their work is multivalent and rich and contradictory and full. Not everyone got it right away. There were students in the class who pushed back against the notion that John Keats could have written anything that vulgar. It took time for our parameters to shift, for our understanding to expand. Dr. Gillin modeled that understanding, gave us examples, gave the notion time to manifest in ways that stood us in good stead for our subsequent courses at Washington College and grad school, and our careers, and our lives, our relationships with other people. What a magnificent lesson that everyone you deal with every day is more than your idea of them, is multivocal and multivalent and complex, and that's just what human means. Dr. Gillin taught that lesson to 46 years worth of Washington College students, and that is a significant part of his legacy here. But it's not all of it. We are here tonight primarily to celebrate another part of his legacy, Kiplin Hall. What is Kiplin Hall? It's many things. It is the name of a building in England, in North Yorkshire, on the banks of the River Swale. That building is the ancestral home of the Calverts, who, as many of you will remember from high school history, is the family that founded the state of Maryland. Kiplin Hall is also the study abroad program that Dr. Gillin and his wife Barbara dreamed up and built. Some of you know how much work that is to make a good thing appear in the world that wasn't there before. He found the money and staff necessary to take generations of Washington College students on the most extraordinary trip of their young lives. 2 weeks in North Yorkshire, the Lake District in England, and in West Cork in Ireland. He did so because it wasn't enough that his students come to an understanding of the poems we were reading on the page. He wanted us to dwell in the landscapes to which those Romantic poets were responding. Year after year, he and Barbara took students to experience the sense of place that manifested in so many of those poems. Now, how influential is Kiplin Hall to Washington College students? Well, 4 years ago, I taught a creative writing workshop on travel literature. And a third of the way through the semester, I had to institute a moratorium on pieces about Kiplin Hall because it was all my students wanted to write about. That trip had so filled them that they'd forgotten everywhere else they'd ever been, I guess, and I had to make them remember. So those are the two pillars on which Dr. Gillin's legacy rests. The book whose launch we are here to celebrate tonight is the cement that will hold those pillars in place. We'll be putting up a link later on where you can buy the book from a store that does not require its employees to pee in bottles, and I hope that you will. What does this book do? It takes the Kiplin Hall program that Dr. Gillin developed as a model through which the teaching of the liberal arts generally can be improved. Part of the answer is in the book's title, Through Hiking. I was 22 years old and just about to graduate from Washington College the day I learned what that sort of walking can do for you. I had a big decision to make and I was feeling overwhelmed, and I just started walking along the Chester River. And about 45 minutes in, I suddenly knew exactly what to do, and that decision has shaped my whole wondrous life. Walking without distraction brings clarity. I was not the first person to figure that out, and I managed to forget it every 6 months or so, but it remains true. Walking brings clarity. It does for me, and it has for generations of Washington College students, thanks to Dr. Gillin. And now, here to speak about this book and the experiences that informed it is the author of Kiplin Hall, Dr. Richard Gillin. Dr. Gillin, take it away.
Well, thank you, Roy, for a brilliant introduction. I hope I live up to the next segment of the event tonight. I'm going to do a few things that are a little bit, I'm not sure they're really unconventional, but and I've been warned that I shouldn't read. The traditional way of going about a book discussion is for me to read, or the author to read passages. But I've decided that since Zoom can make people kind of sleepy to begin with, I don't want to put people into the arms of Morpheus. And so what I'm going to do is kind of tell stories that are connected to some incidents from the book, and read short passages from the book. I'm also going to have screen share where photos from various trips should appear on the screen. My daughter Courtney is here helping me, and because if I did it, I'd probably erase the whole content right now. So she'll put that up in a moment, and we'll go with that. Okay, first of all, as far as the book is concerned, it has an interesting story in itself. Back in roughly about 2015, after graduation, a few faculty members had a small tradition that we would meet in O'Connor's Irish pub after the ceremony. And so Barbara, I and Bob Mooney and Austin Lobo and Donald McCall met, and we were sitting cooling down after the ceremony and also drinking beer. And my wife was saying that she's been trying to get me to write for several years, which is true. And I keep resisting. And I started to talk about something that I've been thinking about, and that had to do with the role of liberal arts in our nation, and how I thought that a new thing that was on the horizon called MOOCs, these were massive open online courses, they were starting to make a lot of noise, and it just seemed to me to be counterproductive and against what I knew from my experience at Washington College was the truth having to do with learning literature and having students who really did appreciate and respond to literature. So it started, a discussion started with that. And I did follow that up, but Bob Mooney kept saying to me that you have a story to tell, you and Barbara have a story to tell about Kiplin Hall, and that could be a wonderful anchor for what you were thinking. Well, fast forward, during at that point, it was about, had been teaching about 42 or 3 years, and I only took one sabbatical, and that was my fault. I certainly could have asked for more, but I didn't, because I was, quite frankly, I was really engaged with a lot of stuff, being chairman of the English department and the humanities program, among other things. And so I kept putting off, and Barbara kept saying, no, you need to get leave and you need to start writing. So anyway, I got the leave and I started writing. I had a whole semester off in the spring of the year, and I loved it. I really, really enjoyed it. And I would work for at least 2 hours in the morning, and I felt refreshed. At that point, I was able to run before I would start writing. So I really felt sort of on top of the world, and things went along pretty well. And then we were diagnosed, and that changed everything. And my energy for the book kind of flagged. I had pretty much finished it by that point, but I kind of lost interest. And Barbara kept pushing me, saying, "No, you've got to get moving on this and get back to it and get it out. Start to trying to get a publisher." And I kind of half-heartedly agreed. And I was, I guess, morosely caught up my own thoughts. Anyway. As time went on and Barbara died, I lost all interest in it. I wasn't going to do anything and just let it go as a failure. And my daughters, last year, roughly about this time, they were on me big time. They had taken over Barbara's role, very much their mother's daughter. And they kept urging me to do something. So I did. And last summer, the publisher said they were interested in publishing it. Pardon me. They would send it out to reviewers first, which they did. And the reviews came back very favorably. And they said, okay, we're on the way. And by December, it was published. What happened over the summer, though, it was a great lesson to me. My manuscript was about 320 or 30 pages. And then one of the reviewers in particular pointed out that there were passages that were very nicely written, but they were really kind of off the main focus. And the advice was to focus clearly. So I did, and I took to heart what Samuel Johnson told his readers, that if you're going to write, take your best line and strike it out, edit really harshly. And I did. I cut the manuscript almost in half. Anyway, it was published, and I'm very happy that it was, very happy that a number of the incidents that were recaptured, I hope, will live in the book, and also kind of fulfilling Barbara's impetus to get it going. So what I'd like to do now is to talk about elements from the book, and I'll promise to be focused here. Pardon me. In the early part of the book, I write about an incident that took place in my first year, in that first semester, and it had to do with a class of freshmen, and we were talking about Yeats' poem, pardon me, the Islet Innisfree. And in the process of talking about it and developing it, it was a small group, maybe 12 students, something like that. I had a kind of moment of insight, and this is what I wrote about it. In that classroom on that autumn morning, I knew that I was hooked. Nothing in my working life before gave me such a sense of blended excitement and satisfaction. My aim as a teacher to create more moments like the one I had bound me into a sort of personal pledge to myself. And that idea of making something palpable was one of the things that came through, that it almost felt, as we discussed the poem, it almost felt physical. And that notion of physicality was sort of embedded in the back of my mind. The story of how we got to the Lake District and how we developed the Kiplin Hall program was bound up in part with an experience that Barbara and I had as graduate students in the summers of 1970 and 71. We were part of a group of students, a small number of students, who had the opportunity to meet with some of the more outstanding scholars in the field of Romanticism, and particularly in Wordsworth studies. And while we were in the lakes, we were literally living in Wordsworth's house for the classes. At that point, it wasn't a museum, it is now. But we got an opportunity to go out into the landscape. I mean, we had no hiking clothes or anything of that, so we just went out and hiked behind Rydal Mount where Wordsworth lived. And this is what I remember. During our time outdoors, we were arrested, literally stopped and taken by the unique particulars in the landscape. The air was cool and bracing. The sun made the green in the landscape glitter with a freshness that seemed primeval. Only our heavy breathing disturbed the environment, but then the deep breaths were a way to internalize the ambient vitality of the air. The distant Lake Windermere, shrouded in mist that swirled in what appeared to be ethereal strands of light and dark, seemed to be taken from a fairy tale vision. The cool, bracing air underscored the rarefied moment-to-moment apprehension of a landscape I had only known through Wordsworth's poetry. That was those years, those summers in 70 and 71 started the process. And when we were coming home in 71, on the way home in the airplane, I was at that point, Barbara had finished her degree, but I was nearing the end. And I said to Barbara, I said, would it be wonderful if we could take students to the Lake District and go to these places with them? And we kind of laughed, knowing that, that was probably not ever going to happen. But then it did. I had a call, I was chairman at the time, and I got a call in my office from Joachim Schultz, who was the provost, and said the chairman of the board of visitors and governors wanted to meet with me about some house in England that is available. So I went over and he explained to me that what Kiplin Hall was and what was available. And he said, can you do something there? And I immediately said, oh yes, we will have it done. And he was shocked. I went home, told Barbara, and she was teaching at the college at that point. She started calling students, I think, everybody in creation. We were aiming for 10 students and we got 12. And in order to make the whole thing work, we decided to go as economically as possible, which meant that she and I would drive vans, we would make our own meals, we would do everything that we could to cut down costs. And we did. In those days, in the 90s, the place where Kiplin Hall is located did not have grocery stores as we know them, supermarkets. They had just like convenience stores. They were really small, and we would go in and clear off everything on the shelves because there was, 12 hungry young people, and not to mention ourselves. And we came to realize that working together in the kitchen, among other things, making the students responsible to help supply groceries and the like, that all added a dimension that became charming and also valuable for a number of students. And it became one of the mainstays of our time in the program. After I guess it was the first or second year, Joachim Schultz said to me, you don't have to do this. And I said, oh, this is the best classroom in the world. And why would I not want to do that? And he said, well, 3 weeks is a long time. And I said, yeah, well, in some ways it's not long enough. But now I'd like to continue. And we just, we were given free rein to develop it. And, it's one of the remarkable things about Washington College that the flexibility in developing the program and kind of making it the way we wanted to it was an open door, and we took advantage of it and developed what we could and made the best of it. Okay, let me move on a little bit. That's just looking at the picture here. That's Whitby Abbey. Among a number of places we went, one of the more memorable ones had to do with the Bronte family and hiking from the village of Haworth across the moors and up to the site of Wuthering Heights. The house itself was a medieval farmhouse. It's still there. It's called Top Withens. But the walk out across the moors, especially with the Brontes in mind, made it a particularly haunting experience, at least for me. And I know it was true for a number of students. Sarah Snyder comes to mind most particularly. Let me just read this part. The final approach to Top Withens is very steep, and with only one tree blowing in the wind beside the room, the barren extent of the moorland resonates with the midday timelessness. To the west, the land undulates in a series of flowing grassy ridges. Imagining Catherine Heathcliff walking or running through the scene is easy and captivating. That Emily wandered over the ridges and into the extensive open land, absorbing the impressions of a huge sky roiling with clouds and ever changing, communicates directly to me and to the students, as I learned later. As a writer, her habitual contemplation of this environment had to shape her sensibilities and sharpen her perception of natural details. What feels like a place unbounded in the midst of this landscape, even today, stands in contrast to the confines of the parsonage and the Harworth village. Release from the social impingements and family duties had to enlarge her soul and the richness of her observation. Certainly, it figures into her poetry and Wuthering Heights. The answer to the question I asked myself about why some people feel compelled to be in the landscape of the Harworth moors has become clearer over the years of my visits. We cannot be 19th century people with their particular worldview and their immediate sensibilities. The historical past moves farther away with each year, but the best of literature transcends time and place. And while Wuthering Heights is a first-rate novel in part because it speaks to us out of a particular time in the 19th century, it also evokes wonder on a physical scale. To be able to feel the scattered pathways across the moor is a tactile link to Emily's 19th century world. The articulation between words and tactile sensations both stimulate and confirm a deeply imaginative awareness of particularities, creating a kind of organic relationship between ourselves and the environment. Again, that issue of something that is felt, something that in this case was tactile, is one of the threads that runs through our concerns. Okay, let me move on to the one longer piece I have here, and I will. It's hard to cut down, but I'll try to do that. One of the places we visited was an area, a mountain called Langdale Pike, and whenever we went out there, and it's about the most remote area mountain, something would happen. The day would be beautiful and it would become absolutely awful. People, I'm thinking of Renee Vess, who's out there, almost slid off the mountain at one point. Not something we wanted to have happen. In any case, this one particular time we were there, we were hiking, got to the top. It was an absolutely beautiful day. And I looked at Barbara, I said, wow, this is, maybe we broke the back of this thing and it'll be fine. And almost on cue, the hail started beating down and it started really lashing hard. And here we are at the top of the mountain, which is not a good place to be when things start to go wrong, better at the bottom, obviously. And I knew that we had to go down a rather treacherous area. In the best of times, it was difficult. Anyway, we had no choice, so we started down. And on the way up, there was a young woman who was having a really, really hard time. And Barbara stayed with her, as she almost did with all the time with students who were struggling. And she talked her into getting to the top. And when she got to the top, she was absolutely delighted with herself. She'd never done anything like that before. But coming down, it was something entirely different. We could hardly see because of the lashing hail, and it got very cold very quickly. So this is part of what I'm just going to read this one section of this part. The woman I told, by the way, I'm sorry, I could back up a little bit. I told the rest of the students to go down, just to follow the pathway all the way down and wait in the pub down at the bottom of the mountain. And we would be down shortly, I thought. And so off they went, and Barbara and I stayed with this young woman. The woman, seeing the others descending at a soldier's pace, began crying. Her mud-soaked boots, saturated clothing, and trembling begged for sympathy and commiseration, both feelings I had for her in excess, but sympathy was not going to get her down. Nothing but her own willpower and resolve would work. There were no mountain services with brawny men able to pick her up and carry her down. Given the weather conditions, a helicopter rescue was out of the question. She had never done anything remotely connected to the kind of physical activity we were doing, even though students are told before the program begins that they have to be in good physical shape to succeed in the hikes. Nevertheless, we had to move. Looking downward in the direction where I knew the trail led, I longed to be where I could not see. My body was rebelling. My shaking hand served as a counterpoint to the twitching in my upper body and the shiver in my legs. My feet were wet to numbness. I did not know where my limit would be, but I suspected that I was nearing that unwanted discovery rapidly. Discomfort and exasperation caused by inertia flared anger into my chest. I could feel my self-control slipping. Fortunately, I did not say anything, held back primarily by the insistence of the still shredding hail. Fighting to make eye contact with the woman in the hope of getting her to move on, I blinked away some of the melted hail in my eyes and caught sight of her clearly as she sat down in the fast running water underfoot. She was giving up with no sense of what she was doing. Looking at her in the mud and water melted my exasperation and momentary anger. In obvious pain and giving into the maliciousness of our circumstances, she was abandoning hope. Barbara quickly ordered her to stand up, stop crying, and move on. The commanding tone of Barbara's voice seemed to reach deep into the student's sensibilities, and she did what she was told to do. I had renewed visions of sustained movement downwards to dry warmth, and hope rose. My fantasy dissipated in no time. The woman was up but barely moving. Barbara and I took turns staying next to her or leading her by pointing to each place she needed to place her foot. Foot by foot and step by step, we were coming down. Water-soaked creases spider-webbed her jacket, her legs mud-splattered to the knees, and bedraggled hair falling out from her hood gave her the air of bewilderment. After an hour, the pelting hail switched to a driving rain. By now, I could see a bench that was placed some years ago in warm, sunny weather. And for a few moments, I lost myself to daydreams about warm, hot days we have spent on this mountain. The severe discomfort in combination of frustration at the slowness of our progress and my heartfelt sympathy for the woman led to reflections about the way different emotions strain to wrench us in one direction or other at the same time. Thoughts about the sense of feeling and how sensation creates emotional states became a way of detaching myself from what I was feeling both sensually and emotionally at this time, and opened a way of understanding something essential about learning. Simply put, it had to feel right. Just as we talk in terms of gut feelings or being rubbed the wrong way, really knowing something carried an emotional commitment. For now, I just wish I could feel less wet and cold. I could not deny my real feelings of enervating cold in my bones and anger at the cause of them, and my fundamental concern for this woman who was pushing the limits of all that she had ever experienced physically, and as far as I could discern emotionally as well. I really wanted to just leave her on the one hand because of my own pain, yet for moral, ethical, and emotional reasons, I could never do that. The ache in my deeply cold legs at by this point settled into my knees and made each step an exclamation point of pain, acknowledging yet another completed step. Dungeon Gill's consistent roar deflected my self-centered thoughts for a while. How wonderful it is, I thought, that distractions can subdue our anxieties. The change of focus shifted my languishing hope to a brighter place. Throughout the descent, each of us slipped many times. It was impossible not to with hail-glazed rocks higher up and moss-laden stones partially submerged by the now constantly falling rain, threatening every footplant. Elbows, knees, and shins provided target points to be bashed at each slip and fall. Bracken. Entering into a stand of bracken brought some relief since the ground was spongy with thick moss in contrast to the rock-embedded trail above where we were. 2 hours had passed since I sent the rest of the students down, and in the last stretch of the trail, I recounted the climb and especially the descent, shamed at my thoughts of anger for being held up so long by this student who was by now walking steadily on the largely even trail. I thought about her and what she had accomplished. At the moment, I was too cold and wet to talk or even think clearly. I just wanted to get indoors. Throughout the ordeal, Barbara was a rock. She spoke calmly and encouragingly to the woman and convinced her that she would succeed. Her care was genuine and her own discomfort was never an issue. She held her hand and coaxed her on. Several times in my own cold frustration, I asked if she was okay or if she wanted to descend and I would stay with the student. Her clear-faced look enhanced by a stare was unmistakable. She suggested that I might want to go down, but she was remaining. Arriving at the base of the mountain, she showed no outward signs of cold in contrast to my jitterbug movements with my body in full rebellion. The group that descended earlier was well warm by this time and joyful for our arrival. I sat by the open hearth fire for over an hour, absorbing as much heat as I could in my slowly steaming and drying clothes. My reflections were on the woman. I did not want to talk. I needed to think. Conditions to stay for a group were worse than I had ever experienced. The surprise slashing of hail welted our faces to the point where trying to see provoked a disorienting loss of balance. Picking our way through the scattered boulders that iced as we moved on a descending incline that is challenging in good weather was unique in my experience and frightening. The young woman had to be terrified given her inexperience, yet she found something deep within herself to goad her onwards. Much of the way down, her face, contorted and rictus, she was flat out, beyond her entire realm of previous emotional and physical experience. She was courageous. The courage that she mustered was connected to circumstances. Surely she would never forget her climb today for all of the physical pain. But more importantly, I believe that she would also know that her discovery of fortitude and courage in the face of significant difficulty will continue to shape her existence. During the rest of her college career, when I would meet her on campus, she acknowledged the life-changing experience that came to her on Langdale Pike. Her success made me feel very proud of her and disgraced at my own self-concern for warmth and relief. Okay, I said I wouldn't read long, and I'm going back on my word. Let me just move over to another incident, and I'll just summarize this because it's long. One of the places that is a favorite actually among students, at least that's what they tell me, and was certainly a favorite of mine, was visiting Michael's Sheepfold and Greenhead Gill. It's a steep walk, but not a long one, up into this very narrow valley. And we were at the Sheepfold, and we were taking turns reading the poem and passing the text around from student to me. And behind me, Barbara was doing something, and I wasn't paying attention to her. I was trying to pay attention to what I was talking about. And all of a sudden I heard this smack, and then it was a number of people said, "Oh no." And I turned and I didn't see Barbara, and it turns out that she had fallen face first. I'm sorry. She had fallen on her face onto a boulder and was knocked out. And we were I was very upset. Everybody was upset, quite frankly. This area is not terribly remote, but we hardly ever saw any other people, at least Barbara and I never saw other people up in this area. But this particular day, there was a young Englishman who called to me when he saw that we were very concerned. He said, "I saw her fall and I have a mobile phone, call in mountain rescue." And he climbed up a bit higher and was able to get mountain rescue. And about 20 minutes later, a helicopter came over, and it was circling around, but obviously there was no place to come down. And I could see it go down to the base of the mountain. And about another 20 minutes or 25 minutes, a team was coming with a stretcher. There were 6 people. And one of them was a doctor. And when they got to Barbara, she was awake by that point. Fortunately, we had a woman with us, Dee Dee Pardo, who was a qualified EMT person, and she knew what to do. And she immediately had the students get their spare socks and anything they had that could retain water, and go into the stream, get the cold water and bring it back. And we wiped Barbara's face and kept her comfortable with that. Eventually, the doctor said, well, we need to get her out of here. We need to get to a hospital quickly. And I said, yeah, okay, that's fine. And he said, our helicopter can't do much, but the RAF is having maneuvers nearby and we can call them in. And Prince Harry is likely to be the pilot. And anyway, so this fellow was talking and making a case for Prince Harry maybe to come and rescue Barbara, and Barbara was having none of it. She said, I'm not going to be on a cable and kind of at the mercy of the wind and turn into a pendulum. And so she was having this argument with the people I came to rescue her. And Dee Dee Party was saying that, in America, you would have no choice. You would just be you would do what they told you. Anyway, they were able to bring her down step by step. The path is fairly narrow, maybe 2 or 3 feet wide. And the person on the outside would occasionally slip and let go of the stretcher, and then scramble back up again, and eventually got her down. I don't want to go too far into the story, except to add that we had an immediate problem. Barbara at that point was driving a van, as I was, and pardon me, my daughter Courtney had come to help us out. We needed 3 vans because we had a very large group. So there were two of us who could drive, and we had an extra van. What to do? So since Dee Dee was older, we just nominated her as the driver, and we kind of triangulated between Washington College business office and the insurance company, and we're able to make her the next driver. And poor Dee Dee, she said, I have no experience driving on the wrong side of the road, and this is a van. Well, time to learn fast, and bless her, she did. But that was one of the misadventures that in the long run turned out to be pretty good. I have a section here from Ireland. Hiking in Ireland is substantially different from England. That almost sounds like it's a silly thing to say, but it's, hiking is about moving your feet. And well, yeah, there is that, but in England, they have actual trails. In Ireland, there might be a trail, and most of the time there is not. So we had to kind of find our own way. Fortunately, my son-in-law, Frank, often served as a guide, and that worked pretty well. And with him came his father, Vince, who at the time that this incident took place was in his, I'd say maybe 80, about that. And he is a person who could go on for hours reciting poetry, Irish poetry, as well as other forms of poetry, and all from memory. And he could perform that, and he would sing. Anyway, we were going on this hike to a place called Hungry Hill down near Ardrigall, and it's the south part of Ireland, very much the south part. And once again, we started off with a decent bit of weather, pardon me, but as often happened, things change. So let me pick up the story here. Then almost on cue, the sky darkened quickly, winds blew sharply down the slope at us, and the air filled itself with moisture. My hope for a lovely rest in the sun-radiated summit, looking out at the glazed Atlantic, fragmented almost in unison with the deterioration of the weather. Through the riffling raindrops, I could see a notch in the ridge ahead and told the students that we would stop there for lunch and a class. A class, they roared. It was the unifying reaction from the students. Well, I'll try, was my reply. At the ridge, the rain dropped with heavy enthusiasm and dampened our own. Urging everyone to get close to the rock outcropping at the ridge, I added that we could eat our lunches here. Water seeped into every seam in my clothing, chilling every movement I made as the wind blew about 40 miles an hour. Uncomfortable as the students were, they never complained. Stoically, they ate lunches in the downpour, many of them making light of the situation in a good-natured way. This will be something I'll to tell my friends at home, or maybe my children or grandchildren. It's the stuff of legends. As I unwrapped my sandwich, the wind blasting at gale force now took it perhaps all the way to Boston, the next landfall. Vince was the image of resignation and defiance of the weather. He recited poems as we all put our backs to the rock wall in a hopeless desire for relief from the scouring elements. The absurdity of the situation instigated a few chortles among the students, then some giggles and a full-long general laughter in the wind. Talking was useless. Nothing could be heard above the roaring wind. One of those moments, similar to the ones in our earlier treks, arose without expectation. In circumstances well beyond our control and painfully unpleasant, we shared a single focus. We felt a common bond, although a shared misery, and knew that we were being changed by our joint bond. We were on our own and at the mercy of harsh natural elements. We had to take responsibility for ourselves as individuals and as a group, and there was will to do that. As quickly as the rain and wind started, they ceased, and the air warmed enough to be noticed. Glee replaced the somberness of our sodden lunch, and the students wanted to push on to our goal, the summit. Our initial joy at the absence of rain and wind gradually sifted into another level of resignation as we navigated among the bogs that had recently been cut for fuel. The sponginess underfoot lapsed into muck, and almost every step had to be calculated to find at least a likely soft, wet spot. Frustratingly slow, considered movements eventually landed us on a series of rock faces in the rising cliff, raising spirits with the change. At the top of the mountain, now visible, I could feel the energy of the group surge, only to be tempered by a very large bog, followed by an ascending order of ridges about 70 feet each before our goal. No one was dry nor unmarked by freely flowing mud now crusting over our upper bodies. Picking our way for solid footing became a sort of game. One good foot placement followed by a knee-high sink into the murky ooze. Like some mythic creature, the bog kept trying to suck us in, but the deep fellow feeling among the group members now pushed back against the bog as each person simply took a responsibility to help out anyone who was sinking or stuck. One woman, in utter frustration with the slow pace, decided to run across what looked like a field of grass. 5 yards into her run, she sank with a slick slip high up to the top of her thighs. Finding herself immobilized, she began to panic with the sensation that she was sinking and cried out for help. Immediately, the students formed a human chain, themselves sinking as they moved. Gathering her under her shoulders, they extracted her from the mud with a whooshing sound, heartening to her ears. Her terror melted into laughter, abetted by her classmates in a wash of emotional support. Back to slow, steady, and safe for progress resumed, the climbs over the remaining ridges taking us to our hands and knees. In that moment, I saw another confirmation that important changes had taken place for the students. They understood almost instinctively what had to be done, and they moved without regard for their own comfort. I'll read one little piece and maybe turn it over to anybody who would like to ask questions, if that would be okay. Just one last note here. I could go on with testimonials, but what threads former students' comments and observations together is that what they experienced in the Kiplin Hall program had degrees of life-changing dimensions, the essence of a liberal arts education. Barbara and I are forever grateful for Washington College for giving us the opportunity to develop and run the program, and have faith that the ideals of the liberal arts will continue into the future. And that is, again, a kind of summary of things that were part of the trip. I probably should have said more earlier about meals at Kiplin Hall. Barbara was in charge of the kitchen, and she arranged to have 4 students every night work with her, and they did. And we had, I think, wonderful moments. The food was not gourmet fare, but it was sustaining. And after you've been out hiking all day long in the elements, even eating boots seemed vaguely attractive. But any case, I've been rattling on here for, I just realized, a long time, and I don't want to bore you. So Roy, can I turn this over for questions?
That is absolutely the plan, if you don't mind. I'll welcome everyone. You can raise your little blue hand and we will call on you from the participants panel, or you can put your question into the chat. Or if you like, if you'd prefer that your question be anonymous, you can send me a private message and I'll read it aloud. Any one of those things will work. Thank you so much, Dr. Gillin. That was great. The floor is now open. There's one in the chat there, Dr. Gillin. Glad you kept the great stories. Oops, sorry. How did you select which stories would go in the book? And did you do any readings during the hikes?
Yes, we did. We had classes every day. And the classes involved focusing on specific works. Mostly of Wordsworth and Coleridge, but I also included Keats as well as the Brontes and Cadmian. There were a host of, and in Ireland we did Irish poetry, some Seamus Heaney and Leanne Sullivan, who's a young poet among others. So yeah, literature was in the air, and one of the things that we found became more and more enjoyable. The first year we did the trip, the first night we had dinner, people were grazing. They were coming in, eating and leaving. And Barbara, who was, I think last of the Victorians, she said, oh, no, we're not doing that. Nobody's eating until I arrive in the dining room, and everyone will sit and talk. And at first, there was some discomfort about that. But that became the hallmark of our evenings. And what occurred over almost immediately, in fact, even in that first year group was wild. And I saw some of the first year survivors out there in the audience, but the thing of it is that we found that the students could talk pretty freely and very informally. I've told the story before about how in the first day or two, students were very respectful. Oh, Dr. Gillin, Mrs. Gillin, and by about the third or fourth day, it was hey, give me that. It became that relaxed, but there was still an awareness of things that were different. And the informality, was something that we came to enjoy. That first group, for example, every morning, some of the students would create erotic sculptures using vegetables and fruit. And Barbara would be greeted by that every day. And she'd have some comment about it, some kind of snarky comment about it, but laughed, it was funny. And we had 2 vans that year. And I was driving one, Barbara the other, and a number of females in my van decided it would be funny if they mooned Barbara's van. And so they would do that. I didn't know it at first, but then I learned about it, and I said to Barbara, they're mooning you? And she said, yeah, it's kind of stupid, isn't it? Because, it's me. I said, yeah, I guess so. And we, kind of pointed that out. And there were a number of, just silly things like that became fun. I think for a number of students, and it was more true of the early years as opposed to the later years, going to a pub. There was a pub nearby about 2 miles away, and when the students from University of Maryland used Kiplin Hall, they were on their own, and they could go to the pub, but they had to walk, and we decided we're not doing that. The road was, I thought, pretty treacherous, and people fly along there, and I didn't want anybody getting hit. So we decided to go with the students. And at first we didn't realize that, okay, the best thing to do is to start later in the evening because they close at 11. So in the beginning we would get there about 8 o'clock, and it was too much time for one thing. But we came to realize that the pub was the center of social life for the village and the area. And our group became immediately attractive because we always had more women than men, and the local farm boys would love to come in and size up the American women. And there was never anything untoward. In fact, there was something very healthful. One year they decided that they would like to have a baseball game with us. And we said, baseball? And they said, yeah. And I said, tomorrow night we'll have a baseball game. So we went a softball game. So there was a green in the middle of the village. And sure enough, they showed up with bases, with softballs, bats, mitts. And we played them. Of course, we just dominated, easily. And they said, okay, how about tomorrow night we play soccer, football? And oh yeah, fine. And I think they had elementary school kids in there, and they just wiped us up. They were so much better at it. But there was a good fellow feeling about the whole thing, and genuine, I think, friendliness on the part of the local people that we met. Anyway.
Excellent. Another question from the chat. What were the biggest changes you noticed in how students responded over the years? Were there changes you had to make in response to changing times?
Well, I mentioned the pub. In the later years of the program, fewer students were interested in going to the pub. I was kind of surprised about that, because in the beginning it was like, wow, I'm 18 or 19 and I can get a drink. The last couple of years, that wasn't a big thing. I think that the sense taking things seriously. I don't want to dismiss the early years because they were fine, but I think that there was a different sense that this is an opportunity to take advantage of this academically, and so there was a bit more focus on asking me lots of questions about the authors we studied. We also instituted a blog, which I think is still on the Kiplin Hall site in England. Students wrote blog entries about the places that we were going to be visiting the next day. And so there's, I guess there's at least 3 or 4, maybe more years of the blogs on that website. So that's available. And we didn't do that in the beginning. And it was at that time they weren't blogs. I mean, we're going back 20 years.
Right. The next 7, 8, 9 comments in the chat are all about the music policy in the vans. Would you care to share more about that?
Yeah, there are a number of performers that I can't stand to hear. Having heard a lot, we had an arrangement in each of the vans that everyone would have a choice to have their music on for a period of time, and some of it was pretty awful. A particular group of students had songs that were absolutely off the charts in terms of being vulgar, and they loved to play them for Barbara's edification. And Barbara, was not going to give in. She rolled with it. In fact, when she went back to teaching in middle school, she knew the lyrics to these songs that the middle school kids were shocked to learn that she would even listen to. Anyway, that was part of it. But one of the great moments was Liam Daly, who had a particular fondness for Puccini, and so students had whatever it was that was popular at the time. Then his turn came, and he had Puccini and that, and I am a, what was it? I've just lost the name of it. The Gilbert and Sullivan. I am a pirate king. I'm a pirate king, which he would sing, in the van. And after a while, the students who were rolling their eyes and groaning about this, they ended up really enjoying it, and they were actually singing some of the lyrics with him. So there was that kind of education taking place as well.
Excellent. Alexa Landris, I see your hand. Go ahead. Can you
Can't hear.
unmute yourself, Alexa?
Hi. Okay, there we go. It's good to see you, Dr. Gillin.
Good
I'm
to see
really glad Aaron and Courtney got after you to do this. I'm not surprised, and I'm glad they did it. I guess my question is a little bit two-part, and just wondering if you can share, were you in that area for a while beforehand, which leads to my main question of if you could share about how did you come up with the game plan of where you would go? I mean, it seems like it's great, very ambitious, and the way it all looks is like it was not many problems, and it of course looks like it went very well. I mean, can you share about how did you come up with the decisions of where you would go? Did you spend time there beforehand, or get help from people overseas, or just wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier before we began that Barbara and I spent 2 summers in 1970 and 71 in the Lake District, and we absolutely loved it. We didn't have much experience with Yorkshire. I mean, we had visited York and some of the other places, but where Kiplin Hall is located, it's like the eastern shore of England. It's kind of, it's wide open spaces, and it's agricultural. So what we did was we again, this is before internet connections were widely available and easy. I wrote for books and got lots of books, and whatever we could find, we started putting together. And to Barbara's credit, more than mine for sure, she was excellent at organizing things. And so she would put goals together, things that we could do with alternates, and then worked out the details about how we would do that. So yeah, there was a lot of planning involved.
All right, let's see what else we've got here in the chat. More comments about the music. That was obviously a really, really focal part of the experience. But a lot of students who have been on the trip are chiming in. A few others who were Barbara's students. One of them in 4th grade with fond memories as well. I'm not seeing other actual questions. Oh, here's one from Sarah Contos. Would you consider an alumni trip with former students who couldn't go when we were in school?
That was a topic of concern, great concern during the whole time we did the program. Barbara worked tirelessly to try to get scholarship money for students, and she did. She was able to get a couple of scholarships. I guess you could say we did road shows. We went to various historical societies here in Maryland to promote the program. And at one, an alum from the 1950s was so taken that she paid for one student to go the full fare. Another one that's remarkable is a member of the faculty. I don't know if she's still working for the college, but she was a part-time faculty member, and she graduated the year before we started the program, and she said that she would love to have done that. So she donated her whole salary from what she received as a part-time faculty member for 3 different years, and supported 3 different students. So, and she asked not to be recognized. She didn't want to make a fuss about it, but I am still flabbergasted that she would. I mean, she was a teacher. She wasn't rolling in money, but she gave to that program. We did talk about doing an alumni program for a number of years, and it became very complicated in terms of scheduling, and one thing led to another, and we just got old. And at this point, I would, part of me is intrigued with the idea of going back. On the other hand, there's a lot of very beautiful memories that I have connected with all the elements of the Kiplin trip and the locations. And I don't think I want to open that again. I don't think I can go back. At least that's how I feel. Well, right now we can't go back because of COVID. But even if I could, I'm not sure that I would. I don't know. Physically, I've been having some major issues. The fallout from cancer has taken a lot, and so I'm on the mend. I graduated from physical therapy last week, so I'm really very optimistic at the moment. But I don't think I would do it. Katie Charles is, I think, superb, and she's going to be a superb leader of the program. And that might be something she might think about doing in the future. So,
for the record, there were at least 7, maybe 8 people asking if it could be a trip for alumni who already went and want to go again. So that's something for Dr. Charles to take up. Let's see, a question from Peter Knox. What was your favorite part of writing the book?
Peter Knox's music taste. Never mind. I'm sorry. The question was what, Roy? I wasn't paying attention.
What was your favorite part of the book to write?
Some of the what looked like odd aside moments, like the description of going to Harworth Village. I for some reason, I can't even put my finger on that. I really enjoyed that description, and it's the area that one goes through to get to Harworth from Kiplin Hall is it's the Rust Belt of Yorkshire, the dilapidated houses and row houses. But there was something about the inherent sadness that was there that really captivated me. That was one of the things, and I think trying to capture the feel of what it was like on the hikes was a challenge. And I often said to students, I said, when you go back home, you might tell stories about this, but no one will understand exactly what you have experienced because you have to be here.
Yeah, that makes sense. A question from Alexa Landris in the chat. Have other programs contacted you to try to model this, using this program as a model?
No. It's all Washington College.
Too bad for them. A question from John Taylor. To be unromantic for a moment, especially in light of the informal atmosphere that quickly developed, how did you grade the students?
They did written work during the program, and it was different from what I would normally have them do if I were doing a summer course, for example, on campus. Instead of having them sit in a room writing essays, I had them keep journals, and I corrected them each week. I collected all of them and made comments, made observations, and then at the end of week 3, I was able to grade them. But again, I'd explained to them that it's their participation in what we were doing that also figured into the grade.
Okay, all right. Comments are continuing to come in from students who made the trip, and apparently some of them are independently planning to go back, and we'll be sending you postcards about that.
That's good.
Other notes about the courses, the journals that they took while there. And a question from Leslie in the chat. How did you first approach the mountain of a task of writing the book?
I just simply, I was guilted into it by my daughters. That was part of it. And, last year was a fairly horrid year for a number of reasons. And it was a way of feeling that, okay, I had to do something. I felt compelled to just burrow in and to cut and slash as I needed to, or rewrite as the case may be. So it was just a matter of survival in a way through last year.
Great. A question from Kelly in the chat. Would you have itineraries saved from past trips? I'd love to remember what readings prompted my journal entries.
Yes, I do have that. A lot of my notes were lost. The Thanksgiving of 2019, the last semester I was teaching, at Thanksgiving, Erin and Courtney, again, with their husbands, came to my office and said, "We're going to help you clean out." And they did, like a whirlwind. And so we were in my office, and what do you think of this? Bang. Well, I had notes. And I taught for 5 years at Bowling Green University before I taught at Washington College. So I had notes and material going back 51 years. And they were asking me on the spot, "Do you need this?" No, get rid of it, get rid of it. So a lot of things were thrown away. And in fact, Katie Charles was just asking me about some things which I cannot find. But I do have the itinerary, and I have scattered notes. I have a file on passport photos and things like that, which I don't know why I saved that, but anyway, I do have it. So please feel free to contact me at all and at any time.
Excellent. Question from Pamela. What's your favorite anecdote that didn't make it into the book?
Oh gosh. That's hard. I've got to think that through for a second. I think it was connected once again with Langdale Pike. And that was, no, I'm sorry, let me go back. It was Scawfell Pike. That's the highest mountain in England. And the first time we tried to climb it, the weather was atrocious. It was downright freezing up high, and this is a very remote area. And I came across people there young English guys who we had seen on the trail a little bit lower, and they were in t-shirts, and here we had Gore-Tex and everything else, and they were sitting by the side of these boulders trying to get out of the wind, and they were shaking terribly. And my heart went out to them. I felt very, very sad about that. And we had, for various reasons, we said, okay, we're never doing that again. And then another year would come, and well, we'll try it, and we would do that. We had one year where it was unusually hot, and we got to the top of Scawfell Pike, and a number of people drank all their water. And it was probably about 80 degrees, and there's no trees. It was very hot. I had some extra juice and things like some small packets, and I gave those away. But people were really struggling, and we had to find a way down. And so I decided to go in a straight line, which is not too smart actually. But I kept thinking of a story that Coleridge told about how on Scawfell Pike, he had a similar circumstance. And he ended up on a ledge from which he couldn't see a way off, and he was stuck there, and then a thunderstorm came up. Well, we didn't have thunder, we had heat. Anyway, it took us about 9 hours to get down. We kept going slowly, and when we got to a place where there was a pond, everyone took off their clothes and jumped in. And when I say take off their clothes, I mean they took off their clothes. And anyway, I didn't put that in, but it was certainly memorable.
I can imagine. You then had 7 or 8 people in a row asking how they can get their books to you to be signed.
Oh gosh, I don't. What I'd like to do, and I don't know how far off that is, I'd like to see people in person, and there's got to be a point when the alumni can be activated again, and we can have an alumni event maybe. I don't know. I mean, if you're in the neighborhood, let me know. I'm living here in Boston. I'm in Baltimore. It's one of those B places, But I'm in Baltimore, and there are an awful lot of people I know who live in and around Baltimore. And I commute back to Chestertown several times. I'm going there tomorrow, in fact. So, I mean, there are two locales, and if you tell me that you're in the neighborhood, I'd be glad to meet with you and sign the book.
All right. Yeah, there's another recommendation, something I was thinking as well, that perhaps if people provided their mailing addresses in some way, signed book plates could be mailed instead of,
That's
for
fine.
those for whom in-person
Sure.
meetings wouldn't be possible.
Sure.
A
That's
suggestion
fine.
from
But
Peter Knox.
yeah, the simple answer is yes, I'm very willing to sign book plates or books. That's fine.
Superb. Okay, we've got time for a few more. Question from Megan. Was there one hike that you always found the most physically demanding, or did it change as time went on?
Helvellyn comes to mind. Helvellyn is the second highest mountain in England. And we had, again, like many of the stories, we had years where it was very, very hot and other years where it was wickedly cold. The last time we did it in 2017, I found myself, in the earlier days, we had an agreement. We would get to the top, the summit of Helvellyn, and then I would take a group down Swirl Edge down to the caldera, the ancient caldera at the top of the mountain, and then back up Striding Edge. Striding Edge is a very famous area, a trail really, among mountaineers and people who are hikers. And it's a trail about maybe 2 or 3 feet wide in places, but it drops off on both sides for several thousand feet. So you have to be really, really careful. And we had a couple of incidents where that became a problem. In fact, let me just there's 2 stories involved here. One is the first year we took students up, we took a different trail. And it meant that if we were going to go to the top of Helvellyn, we would have to cross Striding Edge, which is dangerous. And I explained to the students that you can't fool around when we step out onto Striding Edge. And if the weather was bad, we weren't going to go all the way. Well, as it happened, we got to the point where we would be stepping out. And at that point, mist was coming in from the Irish Sea and enveloping us. And I knew that the next thing would be driving rain. So I said, we're not going to do the hike up to the top. We'll just go down lower. And I pointed out, I said, if you look down, you can see very clearly where the trail is. I said, but stay on the trail. Do not get off the trail because there are bog holes down there. And if you go into a bog hole, you risk getting stuck or worse, getting drowning, which is a possibility. So anyway, the students went down, and as we got down to that area where the bog holes were, I said, one of the students said to me, we're missing 3 people, and my heart sank, and I thought, oh my God, the worst kind of thing. So I told Barbara, I said, you take them down. And I instructed the students, I said, go down to the base of the mountain. There's a pub, and go get yourself some hot chocolate and something warm. I mean, I'm telling students I have hot chocolate in a pub. How stupid, but that's what I was thinking at the time. So anyway, I spent about an hour or so scouring the area, climbing back up and looking and being terrified that they had slipped off. We didn't have mobile phones in those days. We had whistles, and we just communicated over distances with whistles. And after, again, I'm very, very cold and very worried and upset, I heard these whistle tones, and I thought that must mean something. So I started going down, and near the bottom, a student was there, and he said, "Oh, I'm coming up to tell you that the missing 3 boys are here." And I said, great. I said, they're not hurt. And, oh, no, not at all. I said, what happened? He said, and he was kind of very slow at this. He said, well, the truth is they had a mini keg in their backpack, and they wanted to do a keg stand on the summit. So they did. And that my sense of upsetness just transferred immediately into being, what the heck, what are you doing? Stupid stuff. So I got to the pub, and by the time I got there, they were doing shots, and everybody was pretty much, flying. And I was now, relieved, but really, really angry. I could get in the vans. And so they did. And always the professor, as we were going along, I said, this is Lake Ullswater, and this is where Wordsworth saw the daffodils. And I started talking about it, and the girls in the back of the van said, we've got to get out. And I said, are you going to be sick? And they said, no, we've got to pee. I said, okay, oh, fine. And we're on this, more or less main road. It's a back road, but a main road nonetheless. And here are our American girls out there, creating the yellow flow. And so I've always had this kind of strange relationship between the daffodils and the vision of what I saw that day. That stayed with me pretty much.
That seems like the single best place the entire evening to come to an end. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Gillin. That was fantastic. Before we sign off, I just wanted to make a few last comments. One is that we've linked, Dr. Hall's been linking to Dr. Gillin's book, both at the Ivy Bookshop in Baltimore, if you want to buy it online, or at the Book Plate in Chestertown, if you are local and able to get there. They have several copies as well. Next, I'd like to put up a link for donations. Usually what we do at this point is we link to the donation page for the Lit House, but today we'd like to do something different. Dr. Gillin has very kindly donated his reading fee from the evening to the Kiplin Hall program, and there in the chat right now is a link through which you can do the same thing. The Lit House will be matching that donation, and we welcome you all to join us to donate to help ensure that future generations of Washington College students can have the same opportunity as past ones to experience this extraordinary melding of romantic poetry and history and landscape and self-reflection and camaraderie that the Kiplin Hall program provides. After that, perhaps we can get a link up to the Lit House events page. We will be co-sponsoring Steve Kornacki's visit to the Star Center on April 1st. Our next actual Lit House visit will be by the poet Rick Barrett. He's giving a reading at 5:30 on Tuesday, April 20th, and a generative workshop at 5:30 on Wednesday, April 21st. And hopefully we have links right there in the chat for you to register for those events as well. I'd like to close by thanking once again our ASL interpreters, Jamie and Stephanie, and our co-sponsors, the Sophie Kerr Committee and the Alumni House. Above all, our thanks to Dr. Gillin for joining us for this, for writing this book, for leading this program, and for a truly wonderful evening of anecdotes and stories. I want to thank all of you for being here for this evening, and we hope to see all of you at our next event. Thanks very much, and until then, good night.
Thank you, Roy.
Pleasure.
I have a question. Can I?
You're still on.
Okay.